Hello, everybody, and apologies for the very late start. I also seem to have a weird delay, and I'm not sure if you can hear that. Okay, I'm hoping technical errors, everything else now is sorted and the people can hear me. So I can see this chat. I'm really sorry for the very unprofessional start to the stream. Ah, great. Iria Edinburgh's here. Tess is here. No weird delay. I'll let you in. Oh, Eliza Psychic. Hello. So I'll let you into a secret. The reason I could hear a weird delay was my desktop was playing the video as well. So I have to apologise. My camera's probably quite blurry. There isn't much I can do about that. But we are going to have a look at some images, and I've got a little short video to play. And so hopefully, if I switch my camera off and on again when I'm doing that, I will appear a little less blurred. But to be honest, having a bit of sort of soft focus now that I'm 50 really works. So do let me know if the sound level needs to be tweaked or, if anything's not working for you. But I'll let you know what I have planned. So, first of all, welcome. It's exactly a year since Weird in the Wade launched. And I really can't believe that. It's been a year since the Haunted Pound Stretcher, hit the airwaves. And it's been such a year. So many new people I've met through the podcast, people that have appeared on the podcast, listeners to the podcast. I've just had a wonderful time meeting so many of you, which is just amazing. Thank you for Rebecca for technical hitches. So I've had like I say, wonderful year, lots of fascinating episodes, lots of great stories I've covered from the Haunted Pound Stretcher, and there will be news on the Pound Stretcher front later. There's been the spooky church at Clop Hill, the Black Magic Church, body snatchers, big cats. I've had wonderful chats with Wayne from Erie, Edinburgh, Owen, who's at the theatre tonight, or else he would have been here, and most recently, Rob Kirkup. I've just had a wonderful time meeting new people, interacting with all the listeners on the socials. And I just wanted to say thank you and give you something back, something a little bit different. So today, as a thank you, I'm going to talk about my haunted house challenge and my first haunted house that I stayed in York. And it's very different to what happened at the Golden Fleece. So if you've heard Monday's episode about the Golden Fleece, you'll know what happened there. And I won't spoil it in case people haven't listened. But where I stayed first, in the Chamber of Trembling Madness, was very different and just as eventful. So I will be giving you the lowdown on what happened there. I've got images for you to look at. I've got a video to show you. Then I'm going to give you some news about the haunted pound stretcher, which I'm really excited to tell you about. And then I've got some news about the tunnels under Biggleswade. And then we'll have time for a Q&A, question and answer session. So yeah, really looking forward to sharing all of this with you. And yeah, why don't we kick off? I'm just going to check the chat. Hi, Tracy. It's lovely seeing all these people turning up who I quite often chat to on Twitter or on Instagram. So let's start with the chamber. And I'm going to bring up some images for you while I tell you about it. So here we go. Now, some of you might know where this is in York. It's on Stonegate, and Stonegate is one of the oldest streets in York. It's been there since Roman times, and it leads from the Minster down into sort of the centre of York and down to the river eventually. But Stonegate obviously is very famous. And just to say, a lot of the streets in York, and actually in Yorkshire, I lived in Doncaster for a while, will have the name Gate. And I always thought it was because they were gated cities or towns, but it's not. It's Viking, and it means street. It's like Gata, I think, is how they would have pronounced it. So Stonegate isn't because there was a gate there. It's the fact that it's a Viking name for the street. So Stonegate is very old, been there at least 2,000 years, been there since the Romans. And this house is incredibly famous, and it was opposite the little snickle way that I had to get through to go to where I was staying. So 35 Stonegate has a reputation for being haunted. And at one point in its history, very recent history, so I've got a notepad here, very old school. Jonathan Craner, the astrologer, and Uri Geller went into business together and turned 35 Stonegate into a haunted house attraction. And it lasted about 10, 15 years. But certainly since 2015, 35 Stonegate has been this Oliver Bonas. So it's a really famous haunted building in York, and it was opposite where I was staying, because where I was staying was in a little courtyard, and I'll show you an image. Just bear with me. Here we go. So this was the view from my front door, and the Chamber of Trembling Madness was in an old medieval house. It dated back at least to the 16th century, parts of it. Other parts was slightly newer. And it was tucked away at the back of this courtyard. And I've got some other images of the courtyard I'll show you in a minute. The building that is on the right there was a church hall, a much more modern building. And the rest of the buildings around the courtyard were very old medieval buildings that had been there for obviously a very long time. But there was an even older building in this courtyard. And this is what remains of it. It's called the Norman House because it was built in Norman times. It dates back to 11, I think it's something like the 1160s. And this is the window that remains. Obviously, there wouldn't have been that brick building behind it when it was a window, but that's, been built next to it more recently. And if I show you the next picture, you'll get an idea of. So that was the opposite corner to the diagonally from where my building was that I was staying. And you can see the old window. And it's one of those sort of, I don't know how you describe them. I'm going to go back. They're like the windows you get in churches with an old sort of casement and two areas that would have had sort of glass. But I'm guessing when they were first built, wouldn't have had glass in there at all. So it was extremely old and historic, the little building that I was staying in, but it wasn't very picturesque. And so I don't have a photograph actually of the building because it was literally just a square block at the back of some big shops. And it kind of was by itself in that sense that the people who owned it were the pub who back onto this old house. So that brick wall that you can see behind the old Norman house is the pub called just called Trembling Madness, and they owned the place where I was staying. But the reason it's important that I show you this is that I wanted you to get a sense of how far away I was from the actual building that was the pub. And this will come into, you'll find out why that's important to know in a moment. So I'm just going to, before I move on to show you what it was like in the actual chamber, just go back. So you can't even, from that picture, you can't really see where the Norman house is because it's right over in the diagonal corner. It was quite a lovely little courtyard, and the entrance onto it was off Stonegate, and you had to go through a big old heavy wooden door that got locked after midnight and opened again at sort of 5 a.m. I had a key for it, so I wasn't going to be trapped in the courtyard. And you then went down a little snickle way between the buildings and then out into this courtyard. And there was a bench you could sit on, but it was quite rainy, so I didn't. But in the summer, it must be a real oasis away from the busy Stonegate. So like I say, in a minute, it will become very clear why I've given you this lay of the land. And I just wanted to say hi to Kate. Welcome. You haven't missed much. I was late starting, had technical issues, and literally I've just been giving the lay of the land, and that's it. And now I'm about to tell you what happened when I stayed in the chamber of Trembling Madness. So here we go. So this was the view of the Minster from my bedroom in the chamber of Trembling Madness. It had, it was so close to the Minster. Looking over here, a menswear shop. This is the back of the menswear shop that's very famous and has been on that street for like 200 years. So really close to the Minster, just off Stonegate, really busy part of York, and yet the chamber was silent. Absolutely silent. And I'm just going to remove my camera so you can get a proper look for a minute at this picture. So here we go. This is the living room, and it's wood panelled. And I don't know if the wood paneling helped with the creating that silence, but it really did um, just feel like you were in a time capsule. And they describe it as being like that. I understand why, because it really did feel like that. There's some very strange and quite disturbing taxidermy. The pub of the same name is crammed full of it. So if you don't like taxidermy, what is it? What? Oh, hello. Oh, you. Sorry. Apparently, I muted myself. I'm really sorry. You know, I used to do streaming um actually on Twitch, and it wasn't this rubbish, I promise you. I will get the hang of it again. Hi, Michelle. Right, I am no longer muted, I hope. I don't know how much you missed. Anyway, I was explaining that it was really quiet in the uh, chamber of trembling madness. The wood paneling made you feel like you were in a time capsule. And it had an atmosphere that was really hard for me to describe. I will be making a full episode about what happened when I stayed there. And um, I will try really hard to come up with an eloquent way of describing the still atmosphere, because it wasn't heavy and it wasn't oppressive, but it was so still. It was like a mill pond with no ripples on it, nothing stirring, but deep. Anyway, wood paneling everywhere in the living room. And I have got another picture for you. This was at night, and there's the pillar in the sort of center of the room, which is really old. And somebody on Twitter said to me, why don't you check out and see if it's got any witch marks on it? And I couldn't find any. But in this light, there could possibly be some towards the bottom that looks like there's some horizontal sort of slashes. So yeah, interesting one, that pillar, because it did feel really old. But what I found really disturbing was that shadow. I don't know if anyone else sees it. That kind of pareidolia. It looks to me like it's a bald head kissing maybe another person, or just kind of kissing a thing. I don't know. I really didn't like it. And I couldn't really work out what was casting it. Um, I see Kate's asked, would I recommend a stay for two adults and two children? I would not recommend a stay here for two adults and two children, but they do have an apartment below that's decked out in 1970s stuff. I'll put a link in the chat at some point to where you can find out more about it. So I didn't spend a lot of time at night in the living room because the light switch buzzed. So the overhead lights, if you wanted those on, they buzzed a lot, and it was quite annoying. And then if you had the little lamps on, you got weird shadows like that I really, really didn't like. So yeah, I was not a fan really of the living room at night. So I spent most of my time in the evenings. up here. And I'll just remove my camera briefly again. There we go. And this is the view of the four-poster bed when I'm sitting in it. And there is something quite unnerving about this image. I think it's all the white. I think it's the black against all the white. Don't mention the handcuffs. I've got a closer image of the handcuffs for you if you want to see them. But it was a very strange room. I've got another image for you taken in the opposite direction. And I don't think it's much better really looking at it in the light. But it didn't feel scary. It's thank you, Jace, for putting the link in. Yeah, the shadow probably was just some clothing. I didn't think the shadow was anything in the living room we're talking about. If I just go back quickly, you can see. So I didn't think that this shadow was anything spooky. It was just clearly an ornament or a lamp or a bit of clothing that had caused it. But I kept moving things around to try and get rid of it, and it wouldn't go. So here is the bedroom, as I said. And at this point, I'm going to tell you about my first night in the chamber. And I'm going to play you some sounds. So I'm hoping they're not going to be too loud or too quiet. So please do be mindful now before I play them. So I went to bed early. I recorded some audio about the apartment. I was really enjoying my stay there. I thought it was really calm. I really liked the atmosphere. And actually, I didn't feel scared. And unlike at the Golden Fleece, I didn't sleep with the light on. But I did hear rain and I thought thunder in the night. And I woke up and I was listening out for the rain and there wasn't any. And I went and had a look on the weather app and the radar, and there was no rain and there'd been no thunder. And yet I was convinced that was what had woken me up. So I first woke up at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I recorded some audio and I talked about a very strong dream that I'd had. Not quite a nightmare, but a very vivid dream. And then I fell back asleep, and during the night I had a sleep recorder recording. So it was just using my mobile phone, and it did pick up some noises, and it categorizes the noises for you. So snoring, there was a lot of snoring. I'm not going to play you the snoring. It said that it picked up a noise that it said was a ghost. And it's the only time a noise like that has ever been picked up on the sleep recorder when I've used it. So it's never categorized anything else as a ghost before or after. And I'm going to play you the ghost noise. I think this is the ghost noise. So I'm hoping it will be loud enough. I'm hoping you heard that. I'm going to play it again. Now, the bed creaked, but it's not the noise of the bed creaking. That made a slightly more creaky noise. It's a really weird noise. So I'm going to play it again. And I'll just switch it up a little bit. So I'm hoping that didn't hurt your ears. And I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat and see what you make of it. If yeah, could be a grunt. Well, I did also think that, was it a noise I was making in my sleep? But it actually to me sounded quite mechanical. And it reminded me of a sewing machine, that, or a pedal. I'll play it for you one more time. And of course, I will put it on the podcast when I make an episode about this. So, the other noise that got recorded in the night was this. And you have to listen really carefully to catch that one. It really is just a click, click. I'll switch it up a little bit. Now, that could possibly be a noise I was making, in your sleep. Sometimes you kind of click but it was a strange noise. And even though the chamber was really quiet and had this really peaceful atmosphere, it also was very noisy with creaks and rumbles and, the wood settling with all that wood paneling. Yeah, whether it was the rain and moisture making it swell, or the heat and the cold, and then the water pipes made a real racket as well. So it had this beautiful quiet atmosphere, but also lots of old rackety rickety noises. Yes, Tess says it sounds like a mango. The second one could be a man's voice. Oh my, don't say that. So, my final piece of information for you about here, and I'm trying to remember if I've got any more photographs. The handcuffs. So, I'll tell you my piece of information. Let's go back to here. So, I told you I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, I woke up and I'd had a dream and I recorded audio. I actually got my little lapel mic out, clipped it to my nightie, and recorded a sort of 5-10 minute piece to my field recorder for the podcast. And I'm so glad I did, because I talked about the noises and what had woken me up and the fact that I thought it was raining and it wasn't. And then I said, I have just had the strangest dream. And I dreamt that the front of the pub on Stonegate, which, if you remember, was across diagonally the courtyard from where I was staying, and then right on the front of Stonegate. So not attached to where I was staying at all. But I dreamt that the front of the pub had fallen in. It had kind of actually, in my dream, fallen outwards onto the street. And it was a really vivid dream that the front of the shop had been like completely damaged and fallen away. And I recorded that and, said, this is what I've dreamt, really strange. I'm going to go back to sleep now. And I went back to sleep and I got about an hour's sleep. And then sometime after 4, this woke me. Oh no, that didn't wake me. That was the click click. Yeah, there was an alarm. And it was really loud. That doesn't make it sound very loud, but it was. It was so loud. And I was worried that it was an alarm, actually within the building. And I went downstairs and I couldn't see anything. And the alarm had been going now for about half an hour. And I even went out into the courtyard. So I went out to have a look just in case there were like a light flashing but I couldn't see anything and I couldn't work out where the alarm was coming from, and the sound was just bouncing around the courtyard. But what was definite was that it wasn't coming from the building that I was in. So I thought, well, there's nothing else I can do about it. It's probably a car that's parked somewhere. So I went back to sleep. Eventually, it got switched off, started up again at about 5:30. I didn't get much sleep. And at 10 o'clock, I got up and went round to see the pub and the chaps in the pub to find out if they knew what had gone off and what should I do if an alarm did go off that was connected to where I was staying. And the guy that runs the pub told me that that night at 4 o'clock and then again at 5:30 in the morning, a couple, it was two women, had tried to kick in the pub door, and they'd kicked in the door badly enough that it had set off the alarm. The wood was all damaged. The door was damaged, but it had got one of those like metal grills, so they weren't able to get into the pub. And it's also a beer shop that sells lots of specialty beer. So I'm guessing they were after the beer. And I was like, that's so weird, because an hour before it happened, I dreamt that the front of your shop fell in. And I'm guessing that maybe if these two women who were clearly quite drunk, apparently from the CCTV, maybe they were banging and trying to break into more than just the beer shop. And maybe I heard them while I was asleep, and that's why I dreamt that the shop was being sort of kicked in. But the only thing I'll say in my defense around that is I really couldn't hear anything from the street. You couldn't hear traffic. I think I heard one really loud motorbike the whole time I was staying in the Chamber of Trembling Madness. It really was that quiet and secluded in that courtyard. So who knows? Maybe if you stay at the Chamber of Trembling Madness, you might not see a ghost, but you might have a premonition. As far as the ghosts are concerned there, it's all a lot of hearsay, and I suspect a lot of it is a marketing ploy. I discovered the chamber because they advertise as a haunted apartment. But it is a wonderful place to stay, very spooky. It's got a lovely little dinky kitchen, so you can, cook. My only complaint was it didn't have a kettle. It had a posh hot water dispenser, and that's not good for tea. I'm just too British. So it's definitely a place to stay and enjoy. In the podcast episode, the full episode, you'll be able to hear the recordings. I will talk about the history of the building. The actual owners know very little, and I've tried to look into it. But it was definitely memorable. I wasn't frightened. I mean, I walked out into that courtyard when the alarm was going off, and I didn't even think, what I was doing. And then the next day, I was telling people, and they were like, you went outside while there was a burglar alarm going off. So, yeah, I'm not scared of burglars, not scared of ghosts. But it was great fun. It really was. I'm just going to check the chat, and then I've got some news for you, and also going to answer any questions that you have. I see Kate's over the idea now of staying in that room. It was lovely. Do check out the 1970s room. There was a family of 4 staying there. It's not a room, it's an apartment. And it's in the same building as the chamber. but it's on the ground floor and a bit of the first floor, and the chamber is on like the first floor and the top floor. So you're kind of in the attic up in that bedroom. But the family of four seem to be having a brilliant time in the 1970s apartment, and they've got an Atari game system. But if you want a PlayStation, then you need to stay in the one that I was staying in, because they've got a PlayStation. They've also got a Ouija board, which I would not touch. And they'd got some kind of devil and demon kind of top trumps card game as well in the living room. Again, not touching that while I'm staying there. So, not much longer. I promised that my live stream would be about 45 minutes to possibly an hour. And I know we had a late start, but I will quickly tell you my news and then answer some questions before we finish. So, first piece of very exciting news is about the pound stretcher. So, I think most of you know the story of the haunted pound stretcher. If you don't, go back and have a look at episode 1 of the podcast. And I'm just going to switch my camera on and off again because it looks like it's gone blurry. And anyway, while I'm telling this, so yes, the haunted pound stretcher started everything. Now that's made it worse. Apologies that, yeah, I'm very blurry, but like I said, soft focus. So the pound stretcher is no longer a pound stretcher. It's Jones's Gym and Coffee Shop, and it's a lovely coffee shop. And again, I'm sure some of you will have seen the photographs of the coffee shop. I got in touch with the manager at the coffee shop and Jim and asked if I would be able to go in and do some recording, go down into the basement where the bricked up tunnel entrances are, and just generally ask questions about the building, the history, Aggie the ghost, just find out from them what they knew and, yeah, see if they'd be willing. Well, they got back to me and they are. So they've got a busy couple of weeks coming up with some big events. But once that's out of the way, I will be allowed to go and explore. And they said they were really excited for this. So it's like, yes. So that's the news on that front. On the tunnels, there will be 2-part episode coming out. So 2 episodes on the tunnels. The first one at the end of May and then part 2 in June. One of the things that I've discovered by working with a lovely woman called Beverly, who's from Biggleswade and worked on a school project with her children about the tunnels, is that we've basically drawn up a map. So we know where the tunnels go. And she went into most of the premises that have basements with bricked up tunnels. And she shared all that information in the photographs with me. And as we were drawing the map and marking on all the buildings, I suddenly realized that every single building that has a tunnel entrance in it is connected to a Biggleswade haunting. And all the major Biggleswade hauntings correspond with the tunnels, apart from one. And that's the telephone exchange haunting, which I've not covered yet. So there seems to be a correlation. And one of the really interesting aspects of this is that the far extremes of the tunnels seem to have the most spectacular sort of ghost stories. So I've discovered a really frightening ghost story about an old girls' school called Camden House Girls' School. We're talking a girls' school in the 19th and early 20th century. And the ghost story came about in the 1960s. And there's a bricked up tunnel in their basement, and the basement does play a part in this ghost story. I've got old newspaper articles from the 1960s on it. So the first episode will look really at that building. And it's brilliant. It's got everything, an old teacher, one of the favourite teachers there who died, the people that witnessed the ghosts in the 1960s, in the basement, in the attic, shadowy figures on stairways, somebody waking in the night, and there's a shadowy figure in their room. We've got builders, seeing things. It's fascinating. And it was so well known that when one of the shops in that building in the 1960s closed, the headline in the papers was "Ghost Shop Closes." It was a shop that sold ghosts. So I'm really looking forward to bringing you that episode. The second part will include a Cavalier ghost. I love a Civil War ghost. And I do think I have found a reason for the tunnels. So I think there is quite a boring, in some ways, not spooky reason for those tunnels in Biggleswade, and probably some really good reasons for why it was useful to tell people they were haunted. So that's my news on the tunnels. 2 episodes coming out around that. Very quickly, after that, so later in the summer, going to be covering Chicksands Priory and interviewing Damien O'Dell, who's pretty much the expert on Chicksands Priory. So if you like a monk or lots of monks, then that's going to be the story for you. And talking of monks, when we finish, I'm going to go and watch Shard Lake on Disney Plus because they're my favourite books. And C.J. Sansom was my favourite author, and he sadly passed away at the beginning of the week. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Shard Lake. But we don't have a huge amount of time, but I promised that I would answer any questions. And while you're busy typing any questions that you have in the chat, just to let you know that today I have launched my Patreon for Weird in the Wade. So quite a few people had been asking about this. Patreon is where basically you can pay monthly. The price of a coffee, I've set it at £3.50, and you get an extra bonus episode. You'll get a live stream like this, maybe every couple of months. And you'll get exclusive merchandise, because the other thing that has just happened is that the Weird in the Wade shop is now open. So I'm going to put links again in the chat, or Jace might, if he's still listening and able to the Patreon and to the merchandise shop. So yeah, if you're one of those lovely people who's been supporting Weird in the Wade on Ko-fi, which is where you can just buy us a coffee, of course you can still do that. But if you want to get some bonus episodes and, some live streams that will be more organised than this, then you can sign up to the Patreon, pay, the amount of a coffee once a month, just all does it for you automatically, and get access to those extra things. So let's have a look at the chat. Tunnels and hauntings, yeah. Honestly, part of the episode, Kate, is gonna be about other haunted tunnels. I've got a brilliant story about a cat who haunts a tunnel in Peterborough. I'm really looking forward to telling that story. And yes, Damien O'Dell, I've had a chat with him. We met in the haunted pound stretcher, and he's really excited. So what's next for Weird in the Wade? Well, I told you, Wayne. Uh, we're going to have Chicksands Priory. And after that, I'm going to probably bring out also some other episodes about York, obviously the one about the Trembling Madness, but I also visited the Treasurer's house, and that has some brilliant stories associated with it. And Rob Kirkup and I talked about the Treasurer's house in York together. That'll probably come out as a bonus episode on the Patreon first, and then maybe in 6 months or a year I'll release the Patreon one. So everyone will eventually get to hear everything. But if you want it like 6 months, a year early, then join the Patreon. Thank you, Jace, for posting the merch. What else? Are there any other questions? Oh, what has been my favourite episode so far? It's a really good one, Kate. It's so hard to say because I love them for different reasons. I have a real soft spot for the What's Haunting Potton Wood because it just went in such a weird direction about apple farming. But also there was something quite folk horror about it. The fact that people smell burning in the woods and they always assume it's got to be, the burning airplane when it crashed. And then I discovered that they chopped down and burnt all the trees, and there was a kind of eco horror aspect to it. I also really love The Pot and Poisoner because Sarah Daisley just fascinates me. And that leads me on to the other big episodes this year are going to be about two Bedfordshire witches, Mother and Mary Sutton. And I have been researching this story for 10 years now. And I don't know if any of you on here know Willow Wishaw. She's a fantastic folklore expert. She knows loads about witches. That's her speciality. And she has written about the Sutton witches as well. And we've chatted about them online together, and she's agreed to be interviewed. But their story is fascinating. It's really sad, but it's also somehow really relevant to today still. So that's also answering part of Wayne's question as well. I also have a really big soft spot for the Golden Pheasant, the most haunted pub in Biggleswade, because I got real chills when I discovered the death that was related to singing in the pub. And of course, that's what people hear, ghostly singing. Although one of our local bus drivers, Joe, the bus driver, he's lovely, and he will probably watch this at some point because he's big friend of the podcast. He reminded me that next to the Golden Pheasant is what's called the George's Hall, and it's also got the Liberal Club in there and a nightclub, and it's often had cabaret acts there for the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So he was wondering if some of the singing that gets heard in the pub is coming from the George's Hall next door. And maybe it's people singing in there, warming up, because obviously the singing was heard in the morning. So yeah, it's a good theory, definitely. What would my dream location to research if money and time wasn't an issue, local or further afield? Thank you for that, share kindness. Well, I've got too many lists. Wayne knows that I want to go and have a tour of spooky side of Edinburgh, and at some point I'd love to cover a Scottish ghost story connected with Fife, where my husband's from, and from that coast along sort of Burnt Island, Kinghorn, Kirkcaldy. There's some brilliant stories around there, and I would love to cover some of those. Tess and I want to do next year, hopefully, fingers crossed, a sort of spin-off to Weird in the Wade down in Cornwall, exploring ghosts of our past in Cornwall, because we met and I grew up some of my time in Newquay before my parents moved up to Doncaster. So yeah, we'd like to go and do that. So road trip, definitely. And then if I could go anywhere, I really want to go to Stephen King country. I want to go to Maine in America, in New England, and I'd love to investigate. And then I'd have to pop in and see Aaron from the Appalachian Folklore podcast and go and explore North Carolina. So yeah, my list is, achievable maybe. And then, of course, Japanese ghost stories. What's the weirdest and most gobsmacking fact you've come across in your research? Possibly the singing in the pub. I mean, when have you ever heard of somebody dying because of an argument about singing? It was just so peculiar. So that was definitely one of them. In the Golden Fleece episode that's just come out, probably the one that made me laugh the most was the fact that this poor chap, back in the 90s, thought his 1990s word processor had been sort of possessed by the Canadian Air Force ghost who haunted the Golden Fleece, because it was just such a peculiar thing to think. And then go to the newspaper. His wife went to the newspaper to tell them all. So that was kind of really peculiar, but also quite funny. And I think I owned a haunted word processor in the 1990s. It certainly didn't do what I wanted it to. Any other? The podcasters has been a huge. What advice would I give to budding podcasters? It's a really good question. First of all, just do it. Don't agonize over it. Don't kind of, oh, should I, shouldn't I? Just go for it. And you really don't need a lot of fancy kit. I'd say invest in an okay microphone. But I mean, I've got this little lapel mic that one of my listeners sold to me secondhand because I didn't want to have it from him for free. And if you bought it brand new, I think they cost about 60 quid, but I got it secondhand for 30. And it's a really good mic. I mean, it's probably not the kind of mic you'd want for sitting and recording at the computer, but even with an iPhone nowadays, you can record really good stuff. You can use free software like Audacity to mix the podcast. So yeah, my advice would be just go for it. Be patient, stick at it, and I think just enjoy what you do. Don't do it because you think it's gonna, I don't know, make you loads of money. Just do it because you love that story or you love the thing that you want to tell other people about. And that's what comes through with the best podcasts, I think. What's my favourite type of ghost haunting? I love a mundane ghost story. So I really love the Black Monk of Pontefract, because although it sounds like he should be haunting, a church or a monastery, he's haunting a council house, or it might not even be a council house. It's a terraced house. And it's like the pound stretcher. It's so normal. And the fact, like in Biggleswade, we've got a telephone exchange that's haunted. So I do really like the ones that play against type. Don't get me wrong, I love a haunted castle or a haunted vicarage or rectory or an abandoned church, but I really love those really normal kind of settings, schools, haunted schools. I mean, I was terrified of various bits of my schools that I went to growing up. Our school in Newquay that Tess and I went to had an Edwardian section that sadly has now been demolished, but it was so old. It was amazing. Um, I'm just having a look at the chat. Kate says, I had my own spooky podcast experience as my son and I had randomly spoken about Daisy Daisy that evening before I listened to it, and it freaked me out a bit to hear it. Yeah. I I had to think really hard about what songs to include in that episode, and actually one of the songs really does tie into today. So I'm going to leave it. This will be the last thing that I tell you because it ties in with May Day. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming this evening. Thank you so much. I hope, technical hitches aside, it was fun and you enjoyed it. And if I hold another one in a few months' time, you'd be happy to come along again. And if I hold one in the future, I will do it more as a proper talk, you know, and not just me rambling on. So thank you. And I will now tell you about those songs, Kate. So in the Golden Pheasant, the most haunted pub in Biggleswade episode, I needed a couple of songs so that these two 1900 blokes could have a sort of rap battle, a 1900s version of it. Now, Daisy Daisy had just come out in 1899, I think it was, or 1897. It was like the pop tune of the, you know, era. But I needed a more traditional song for the older chap, the one who sadly died. If I remember rightly, he's called William, to sing. So I really wanted an older song. And I discovered that Bedfordshire is renowned for May carols or May songs. So not a carol for Christmas, but a carol that you would sing during May. And I found the music for one, and I found a beautiful recording of an old lace maker recorded in the not in the 1850s, in the 1950s. And at that point, she was obviously very old, sounded like she was in her 80s. And she, you know, talked about remembering singing these songs in May. And so that's what I had William sing, this old traditional May carol that would have been sung on May Day today. So I'm going to write a blog post about these May carols and post some links to them to come out on Bank Holiday Monday. And there's been some really lovely modern revivals of them where local folk bands have sung different versions of them. And it's a really lovely song. And there's more than one as well, luckily, that have survived. But yeah, it's a lovely way to end today because happy May Day to everyone and happy Beltane. As I said, thank you very much for joining. If you can, join the Patreon and get the bonus content from now on. And if not, here you go. You can get yourself a mug with the Weird in the Way cat. And if you're lucky, this mug might be haunted. This one hasn't shown any ghostly signs, but yeah, do check out the merch and the Patreon. Thank you so much for joining and putting up with all my technical hitches. And I will say goodbye. I'll just double check the chat before I end the stream. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll see you next time.
Hungry animals were snapping at our feet. In the arms of mystery we embraced defeat. The snow angels were storming the sandcastles, and nothing will ever be the same, 'cause we were saved. My hope cup was overflowing, as sweet as saccharine. I could have bought my way inside, but I always lacked ambition. The snow angels were storming the sandcastles, and nothing will ever be the same, 'cause we were saved. And I know where it's gonna go wrong, 'cause I know you. But don't let me stop the game, 'cause it's just starting to get nasty. It's kind of pathetic, like almost close pathetic. Now when you ran, I held your hand. You can't resist a horror story. I'd turn back if I were you. I can't resist an open wound, so I guess we'll push on through. The snow angels were storming